driven straight through his neck, pinning him to the ground, and his own trouncing hook was embedded in his throat.
And then maybe his pocket watch was exposed. They see it, rip it off, thinking, I'll have that. It's an easy steal. Hi everyone, welcome back to This Case Takes Place. For today's video, we're going to be delving into what is described as the last witch killing in the United Kingdom, which took place in 1995. So this is a real strange rabbit hole one again, involving some pagan cult-like elements as well. It's a very fascinating one in my opinion. I think this is one of the most fascinating ones I've seen in a while.
Yeah.
It's a real rabbit hole.
And when I first looked into it, I was like, okay, obviously it's got nothing to do with witches. This is just superstition. And by the end of it, I'm like, you know what? There's something to this.
This might have indeed been a witch killing. This might have been a real witch killing that happened in 1995. So 1945, sorry, not that long ago. But that's the way the Daily Mail describes it as the last witch killing in Britain. So this case takes place on the 14th of February 1945 in Lower Quinton, Warwickshire, England. Charles Walton was born and raised in the area of Lower Quinton, a quiet rural village nestled in the Warwickshire countryside, just 6 miles south of Stratham-upon-Avon, better known as Shakespeare's birthplace. Like many in the village, Charles worked as a farm labourer. He was particularly skilled with horses and known for being reliable and extremely hard-working. He had once been married, but tragically, his wife passed away shortly after. Although it does seem he was quite a nice man because he did adopt his 3-year-old niece, who was named Edith, but she was known as Edie. He adopted her after her mother died, and the two of them lived together in a modest cottage opposite the village church. By 1945, Charles was nearly 75 years old, and he was suffering from some spinal and some joint issues, but despite this, he continued to work when he could. He had been helping out part-time for a local farmer named Alfred Potter, and been working for him since 1944, mainly just doing some basic tasks like trimming some hedges and things that he could do with his condition, because he was struggling at the time. But remember the name Alfred Potter, as this will come up a few times. On the days he worked, Charles would leave home usually at around 8:30 a.m. with a small snack to eat mid-morning, but then he would usually return home late in the afternoon at around 4 p.m. and would have a hot meal cooked by Edie. Edie herself worked at the print works in the village and usually wouldn't return home until around 6 p.m. Now, Charles was known for being somewhat of a loner, but by all accounts he wasn't disliked, and neighbours described him as quiet, peaceful, self-contained, and someone who just kept himself to himself and was never rude to anyone. Potter, his employer, once called him an inoffensive type of man, though he added that Charles wasn't afraid to speak his mind when he needed to. Locals found him a little bit odd, even mysterious, but they said he had a way with animals. Birds would feed from his hands, and he could calm wild dogs by just talking to them. He was very much a man of the countryside with a deep knowledge of rural traditions and folklore. This, along with his solitary nature, fed into whispers that he might have been involved in witchcraft. On the morning of the 14th of February 1945, Charles left his cottage as usual at around 8:30 a.m. to continue cutting a hedge on a field which belonged to his employer Potter. He didn't carry any tools with him that day, as he typically left them where he had last worked, specifically a trouncing hook and a hay fork. He was dressed for the cold and carried a short walking stick to help with his stiff joints. That evening, when Edie returned home from work at around 6 p.m, she immediately noticed that something was wrong. The hot meal that she would usually leave out for Charles was untouched, and he wasn't home. Worried, she asked a neighbour for help, and together they searched the nearby fields. When they couldn't find him, they went to the farm to speak with Potter, his employer, who told them where Charles had last been working. The group then made their way to a field called Hill Ground, located at the boundary of the farm. That was the last place that Potter said he had seen Charles working. What they discovered continues to haunt the town even to this day.
So when they reached the field, it was immediately clear something terrible had happened. There, lying in the snow, was Charles Walton's body, his head and face covered in blood. His own pitchfork had been driven straight through his neck, pinning him to the ground, and his own trouncing hook was embedded in his throat. His niece Edie, understandably horrified, became hysterical at the sight. Her neighbor quickly took her home while Potter, Walton's employer, flagged down a man working in a nearby field and told him to alert the police. Potter then stayed at the body until officers arrived at around 7:05 p.m. The murder was brutal and deeply disturbing. Charles had not only been stabbed with both a pitchfork and a trouncing hook, but he had also been strangled with his own dog's lead. So just to quickly mention, a trouncing hook we mentioned earlier, it kind of looks like in between a machete and kind of like a scythe. Scythe?
Yeah.
So picture here.
If you pop a picture on here, Josh, it looks like a lethal bit of kit. You won't really want to be hit by one of those.
No.
It could do some serious damage.
Yeah, and for those listening, so like a machete, but with like a sharp edge on the end. So I guess it's used to kind of cut down crops. So that was embedded in his neck. In addition to this, his walking stick was broken and bloodstained, found near to his body, with a patch of his hair stuck to it, indicating he'd been beaten over the head, which gave me the idea that probably the person, because it wouldn't make sense for someone to start attacking him with the pitchfork and the trouncing hook and then randomly whack him over the head with the walking stick. I imagined he was kind of caught unawares with the walking stick, hence there was blood and a patch of hair, and then launched the rest of the assault after the walking stick. That's how I imagine it makes sense to have gone down. Furthermore, although this has never been verified in any police reports, there are some discussions of the case online that claim that, disturbingly, Charles had another injury, one that would add a very sinister twist to this case, that a large cross had also been carved into his chest. In the days following the murder, whispers of witchcraft began to spread through the village. Some believed Charles had been targeted for his strange abilities and knowledge of folklore, rumours that had followed him for decades. Former police constable later recalled the horrific sight. By the time I got to the field, he said, several people had already walked all over the area. The body was awful to look at. One of the pitchfork's prongs were driven straight through his throat and deep into his chest, only about an inch of it still sticking out, so like kind of almost from the top down into his neck and chest. The hook used to slash him had been left in the wound. His head was nearly severed and thrown right back. The officer also noted that Charles's raincoat had been neatly rolled up beside him, which seemed odd. His pocket watch was missing, although the broken chain was still attached to his waistcoat. Clearly, someone seems to have just ripped off his watch. So it doesn't seem like someone tried to rob him intentionally. It seems almost as if like an afterthought, like they killed him, they saw the fact that his pocket watch was kind of like hung on the outside and just kind of tore it off his body. It was also noted that his trousers were undone. Investigators wondered if his killer might have been searching for a money belt, as Charles was thought to have carried some cash with him. If robbery was the motive, police believe that the murderer most likely had local knowledge, but they couldn't rule out any other possibilities. So if Charles was known to have carried money with him and it was a robbery, it must have been an insider, someone who knew him. Once the scene had been photographed and examined, Charles' body was taken to the mortuary. Mortuary? Is that how you pronounce that?
Yes, yeah, mortuary, yeah.
The post-mortem carried out the following day confirmed what everyone feared. Charles had died from shock and massive blood loss caused by devastating injuries to his neck and chest. The cutting weapon in particular had been used with extreme force at least 3 times before the pitchfork was pierced into his throat. There are also signs that Charles had tried to defend himself. He had a deep cut on his left hand and bruises on the back of his right hand and forearm. Based on the state of the body, the professor conducting the postmortem estimated that Charles had died somewhere between 1 and 2 p.m. on February the 14th. So an absolute brutal murder.
Extreme.
Yeah.
And as we were reading through this case just before, you came up with an interesting theory about him going to the toilet.
Yeah.
Because some people online believe that, maybe Charles had been SA'd.
Because his pants were undone.
Because his pants were undone. I think that you would hit them. Yeah. I think you were right with this. So what Cassie said was, she thinks that he might have been having a wee, placed his walking stick beside him, and then someone's come along and sees the perfect opportunity, picked up his walking stick, hit him over the head, incapacitated him, got him to the ground. If he's got joint pain too, hit over the head, he's not getting back up most likely. Yeah. He's going to be dazed and in pain. Also, his joints aren't going to be working properly. So he would have been an easy target for someone just to pick up a pitchfork, ram it straight through him.
Yeah.
And then maybe his pocket watch was exposed. They see it, rip it off, thinking, I'll have that. It's an easy steal. I think you were bang on the money with that.
Yeah.
I think that seems most likely, rather than him being essayed.
Yes. Yeah. No. I definitely think but it begs the question why. Charles, he adopted his 3-year-old niece when her mother died. Like, from all accounts, he was like a really nice old man. I just don't think that someone would have murdered him in that way over a robbery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it seems very personal. But again, what could this man have possibly done so, like, to have justified such a savage, brutal attack when he seems to be a lovely, lovely character? Little old man feeding birds with his hand. Oh, awful. But anyway, the investigation continues.
While the investigation into Charles's brutal death was underway, local police wasted no time making inquiries around the area. But, sadly with no leads, the Warwickshire's Chief Constable had to call in Scotland Yard for assistance. So this is the big dogs in policing. This is London's police force. Detectives from London arrived on the morning 3 days later. Once in town, the detectives reviewed everything the local police had uncovered. They then headed out to the crime scene. The area was isolated and difficult to access, sitting roughly 3/4 of a mile from Walton's home in Lower Quinton. They then began to cast a wide net from that location and interviewed nearly 500 people across the nearby villages of Upper and Lower Quinton and Adminton. The police interviewed several locals who might have seen something on the day that Charles was murdered, but nothing concrete would come from this. The nearest cottage was just 300 yards away and was occupied by a woman and her lodger. Both had solid alibis and they saw nothing. A local nearby did see Charles walking past his home at 8:15 a.m, but his wife, who was home all day, didn't see him again, even though his employer claimed, that's Potter, remember Potter claimed to have seen Charles walking in the area at around 12:20 in the afternoon. There was also 2 elderly villagers said that they saw Charles near the church that morning, though their times didn't quite match up. Now, Charles also had a friend named George, and George and Charles had a falling out at around Christmas time. This came to the attention of the investigators, who quickly looked into the possibility that George might have been the killer. However, when they saw George, he was a frail old man.
Yeah. Even older.
Older than Charles was, and he was barely even capable of picking up a pitchfork, let alone ramming it through another human being. Yeah. So, pretty quickly, Charles was ruled out. Which leads on to another theory that the police began to look into, and this was, could it have been an Italian prisoner of war? Now, of course, this is 1945. This is just at the end of World War II. Italy have changed sides, but there were prisoners of war in England, but they've changed sides, so this allowed the Italians to have a few more rights than usual prisoners of war. But it also meant that maybe people who were angry at the Allied forces, the English, could have been on the loose and maybe seeking some kind of retribution for...
Or just traumatized.
Or they were there's a lot of possibilities with this, I guess. So there could have been a lot of traumatized, war-hardened men.
Yeah.
And... of course, when there's what's the word that is used?
PTSD?
PTSD.
Yeah.
When that kicks in and triggers,
yeah.
If he might have triggered something in someone with PTSD,
True.
They can flip out, they go in war mode, and they can sometimes turn aggressive, volatile, quite quickly and quite erratically too, sadly. On the day of the murder, which was the 14th of February 1945, there were over 1,100 Italian prisoners spread amongst the area. They were kept in local hostels and along Long Marston. Whilst they were classified as collaborators, meaning that they were cooperative and low risk, people in the village reported seeing several of them out and about during the day. To be thorough, the police interviewed over 1,000 Italian men. They searched their clothing, their kits, their boots, looking for a match for any footprints found at the scene of the crime. But they found absolutely nothing suspicious. All they found was one prisoner who had some rabbit snares, and he was trying to hide them. They pursued that, maybe thinking he was hiding something. All they found, he was hiding some poaching equipment. So pretty quickly, the Italians were ruled out. So investigators then looked at a different lead. There were a lot of British soldiers at the time stationed in the area, around 3,000. So the police looked into the possibility that maybe a British soldier had done this. So they looked into the alibis of the 420 soldiers who were on leave that day. They extensively looked into what they'd been up to, what they'd been doing. But in short, they pretty much found no one in the British Army who could have been responsible. All of them had alibis, and that pretty much went cold from there. The police, basically at this point, were at a loss until they looked towards someone close to Charles, someone you wouldn't expect.
It all started when the first officer that arrived at the scene at 7:05 p.m. took note of Potter's behaviour, the employer. He described Potter as very upset and even remarked that he seemed more worried than one would expect, especially for someone who was used to slaughtering animals. The implication, of course, was that Potter's reaction didn't quite match what you'd expect from a man familiar with blood and death. Now, to me, this seems almost like very like macho 1945 impressions of what a man. I mean, if you're an employer and your employee was found brutally murdered, that, you know, you would have a reaction, even if you're used to slaughtering your own animals.
It's different, right?
Different. But nonetheless, this was the first point that the police were like, something's not right here. Potter was then questioned late that same night, and his story evolved over time, becoming increasingly suspicious. Initially, he said he had seen Charles working on the hedge at around 12:20 p.m. while checking on some sheep. Reminder, his death was believed to be around 1 to 2 p.m. But in later interviews, he couldn't say for sure it was Charles, just that he saw someone working in short sleeves. This was odd because when Charles' body was found, he was wearing a jacket, blood-soaked and slashed, making it unlikely he'd been just in a shirt during the time Potter had seen him. Because if you're working in the field, you're sweating, you're not going to take your jacket off and put it back on. So this is a bit suspicious. Worse, Potter's story about why he hadn't gone over to speak with Charles kept changing. So I had to do a swallow outside of the screen in case anyone heard that. He first said he was too busy dealing with a heifer stuck in a ditch. But it turned out that the heifer had died the previous day and wasn't moved until 3 p.m. on the 14th. So just a reminder, a heifer is a female cow. His shifting timeline also didn't help. Sometimes he said he got home by 12:40, sometimes later. At one point, he claimed he sat down to read the newspaper, but later he said he was tending to some other matters. His story, therefore, was consistently inconsistent. His accounts of seeing Charles ranged from 12:10 p.m. to 12:30 p.m. And his description changed from he definitely saw Charles working to, someone in short sleeves who didn't move. Even more troubling, Potter later admitted to touching the murder weapon, something he hadn't told police initially. When pressed, he claimed he told a local officer about it earlier, but the officer denied this, insisting it only came up after the topic of fingerprints was raised. The neighbor who was with him when they touched Charles' body said he never saw Potter touch anything. In fact, the neighbor said Charles's death was so obvious that nobody needed to check if he was still alive. So to summarize, Potter was saying, oh yeah, I just touched the murder weapon just to make sure that, that Charles was dead. The neighbor was like, absolutely, I was there when the body was discovered and he never touched the body at that point. And then the officer also said that he never mentioned anything about touching the weapon until after fingerprints was raised. So all very, very suspicious.
Well, his head was hanging off.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
You're not checking for a pulse,
No,
are you?
exactly. So it's super sus. Why would you ever touch the murder weapon? So odd. So police began to suspect Potter might be covering his tracks, obviously. Maybe even accounting for any fingerprints that might show up later down the line. But strangely, no usable fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. So did the murderer wipe down the murder weapon maybe? No fingerprints.
Wearing gloves?
Yeah, that's true.
Who wears gloves? Farmers sometimes.
Ah, yeah, there you go. Exactly. To better understand Potter's timeline, the police interviewed others on the property. One key person was the cowman, a 37-year-old who had been working at the farm for 3 years. He said he first saw Potter at around 10 a.m. on the day of the murder and then again at around 12:40. He remembered the time clearly because he had asked Potter what time it was, and Potter replied, "It must be getting on." They then went off. They both walked outside and checked the church clock, which read 1 p.m. That's how he knows it was the right time. They then went off to eat lunch separately and met again at around 2:15 to arrange the removal of the dead heifer. Now remember the autopsy, he died between 1 and 2. This account aligned well with Potter's latest statement made on the 23rd of February, where he claimed he returned home around 12:30, glanced at the newspaper for 5 minutes, then helped the cowman for another 5 before checking the church clock. But police wondered if Potter had waited to confirm the cowman's story before modifying his own, making sure he'd be covered during the most critical period of the day. Potter's wife also backed up his revised timeline. She recalled him coming into the house at around 11 to grab some tools for castrating calves, and again at around 12:40 to help with the cowman. She said she remembers this time because of the wireless radio and the house clock. He returned for lunch at around 1:05, and a baker's roundman even joined for tea. Potter then left again at around 2:15 to make arrangements for the heifer's removal. So while her memory of specific times seems really solid, she couldn't even remember what they'd eaten for lunch. And there was no mention of her husband returning tools shortly after noon, as he had claimed in the inquest, and police made note of that. So she's really specific about the exact time he came in, he left out. It all corroborates with Potter's last version of events, and yet she couldn't even remember what did you eat?
Right.
Yeah.
Me and Josh just popped out for a sandwich.
Yeah.
Do you remember what time that was? It's a weird.
Yeah.
People
no.
don't really just, and we have phones and iPads and things like that. So we can check the time really easily.
Exactly.
Who remembers these things like that?
No.
People remember what they had for dinner.
Exactly.
People don't really remember what
Exact time.
Exact times.
Yeah. Odd.
Just so fishy.
Yeah.
Especially in those days too, when you don't have a phone. People didn't really have a watch. Watches were common, but not that common.
Yeah.
Things
so
like
true.
that. So
Very
strange
suspect.
strange that she'd just coincidentally just remember
exactly
times. Important for a murder. If important about a murder, you need to be in the.
Exactly.
You need to not be there at certain times.
So conveniently also, her story about the trouncing hook also matched her husband's story. She said, he had mentioned touching it, supposedly after the neighbor suggested, make sure Charles was really dead. But again, the neighbor firmly denied that he ever said or saw Potter touching the trouncing hook or touch anything really at the crime scene. He also gave conflicting explanations about why he didn't approach Charles. At first, it was because of the heifer. Later, it was that he'd gone home and read the newspaper. And then it was that he'd helped the cowman. So at each version seemed to contradict the last thing he had said. And crucially, these discrepancies fell exactly during the time frame that Charles was likely murdered. To top it all off, Potter handed over a pair of breeches, which are like horse riding pants, telling police they might find blood on the knees because he'd helped birth a calf a couple of days on the 19th of February. The forensic lab later found traces of blood, but the breeches had been so well cleaned that it was impossible to tell if the blood was human. So why lie? Right?
So suspicious.
So suspicious. But then it gets crazier. They also look into money as a possible motive, because often in murders, money's a motive. Potter initially said he paid Charles around £2 for a fortnight's work. Later, he changed his story and said, £2 is for a single week's worth of work. And that sometimes he drew wages in Charles's name, even when Charles wasn't working. Because he had to get all wages from Potter's father, the actual owner of the farm, this meant Potter was pocketing the difference. When police checked payroll records, they discovered that Potter had claimed full wages for Charles in most of the previous 35 weeks, even though by all accounts, Charles only worked when the weather was suitable or if his health was good enough. Police concluded that Potter had been fraudulently claiming wages and possibly shortchanging Charles. Still, unfortunately, they admitted that despite the inconsistencies and the questionable financial behavior, there was no solid evidence to link him directly to the murder. But come on. So sus.
It seems to me he's got a lot to link him to the murder.
Yeah.
But
it's not just the changing accounts. It's the fact that he kind of waits until he can confirm the story, and then conveniently it lines up with that, and then he gets his wife to back up the last version of events.
Well, his wife's definitely covering for him.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that seems pretty clear.
And the breeches covered in blood. Oh, just by the way, FYI.
Yeah.
And he touched the crime scene, the murder weapon.
Yeah, and said, I was just checking if it was dead. Meanwhile, his head's hanging off. He's obviously dead.
Yeah.
So,
Come on.
And also, his friend, the other guy, said, I never saw him touch it.
Yeah, the neighbor.
When he discovered the body, he didn't touch the murder weapons.
Exactly.
So it reeks of suspicion. I would have pursued that, me personally.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So the question lingers was, who would do this? Why would they do this? So the location matters. The Cotswold, where Lower Quinton is located, has long had a reputation, both ancient and modern, for connections to witchcraft and folklore. Meon Hill, one of the most remote and striking of the Cotswolds hills, has been wrapped in eerie legends for centuries. Some tales claim the devil himself tried to destroy Evesham Abbey by kicking or throwing a boulder from the top of Meon Hill, but according to legend, the locals' prayers diverted the evil and the earth fell short, forming Meon Hill itself. Other stories claim the devil made Meon Hill his home, using it as a base to hurl boulders at nearby villages. And then there are the tales of the phantom hounds, ghostly white dogs with red ears that roam the hill at night, led by Arawan, the Celtic lord of the underworld, who was said to ride a pale horse and gather wandering souls. Even wilder, just a few miles away, are what's called the Rollright Stones. This is a prehistoric stone circle said by some to be the remnants of a Viking army turned to stone by a witch. Detective Fabian, who was the lead detective from Scotland Yard, couldn't ignore the significance of this location. Charles had been killed right at the edge of Meon Hill. Then, even crazier, in 1949, so soon after the murder, 4 years after Charles's murder, at the Rollright Stones, this prehistoric stone circle, 2 women claimed to have seen witches gathering, shadowy figures dancing oddly, chanting, and following a leader wearing a goat face mask. So, you have someone dying in very suspicious circumstances right at a location with ancient occult ties to this whole idea of like the stone circle and remnants of a Viking army turned to stone, as well as the fact that there's a lot of Christian superstition about the devil being in this exact hill. This isn't an accident. It's odd.
It's really eerie.
Yeah.
There's also as well, we should mention about the goat face mask.
Yeah.
Because this has a couple of different meanings depending how you interpret it.
Yeah.
So if you were Christian, for example, this could be perceived as a demonic Satanism.
Yeah.
But if you practice paganism, then this is the symbol for fertility.
Yes.
So if you're having issues with fertile soil, for example, I believe that wearing this goat-faced mask and doing some kind of ritual could help with crop production.
For sure.
Which I believe later on we get into.
Yes, we do. So in addition to where it was, the timing is also relevant to this whole pagan argument. Detective Fabian also discovered many in the neighborhood held a belief that the 14th of February corresponded in the old Julian calendar to the date of what's called the Imbolc, a pagan festival that marks the beginning of spring, and that Imbolc was the best day for a blood sacrifice that would help the earth recover from hardships of the recent winter. So this respected archaeologist called Margaret Murray, she's done a lot of works, but she deep dived into this case, and she specifically said that she was convinced Charles had been killed as part of a ritual sacrifice. She pointed to the fact that that he died on Imbolc, the pagan midwinter festival, and that this was specifically tied to the agricultural calendar. To her, the blood-soaked earth at the murder site suggested the killer had intentionally returned Charles back to the land. So experts weighing in on this seemed very convinced that the date's super significant. So another notch towards possibly being relevant. So that begs the question, was Walton a witch? What other evidence do we have? So while it's pretty unlikely that Charles was the devil-worshipping kind, people commenting on the case refer to what's called as a cunning folk. So in paganism and in Old England, I guess technically you could still argue it's going on today, but cunning folk are what's called practitioners of traditional low-level folk magic. So basically, a cunning man would have been someone locals turned to for help. He had a deep knowledge of herbal remedies, folk cures, protective charms. Cunning folk usually helped heal the sick, guard against evil spirits, or counteract bad witchcraft. It wasn't unusual for cunning folk to charge a fee. Now, there's no evidence that he was a cunning folk or that he was charging fees to local people, but cunning folk is a thing that happened in England. So people think that he might have been one of these. And considering what we know about Walton, he had unusual gifts. He could calm wild dogs with just his voice. Birds were known to perch near him without fear. He was quite gentle and deeply in tune with the countryside. But even if he was him being what's known as a cunning folk wouldn't justify someone violently murdering him in the way that he was. So some villagers, this we do know, had accused Walton of what's called blasting. So blasting is a form of harmful magic believed to curse crops or livestock. The village had suffered a terrible harvest the year before his murder, and in fact the harvest was so bad that the beer brewed from it was undrinkable. Blasting supposedly involves sending, get this, natterjack toads across the land to drain it of all of its life and energy. But Walton's garden notably was said to be full of these natterjack toads. And allegedly, one villager even claimed he'd seen Walton with a toy plow hitching the toads to it as if commanding them to carry out some kind of magical task. So this one's a bit wild. Then, in the days leading up to Walton's death, 2 heifers were found dead. Locals whispered that Walton might have had something to do with it. So, although this seems really far-fetched to us, being in 2025, the truth is that contextually speaking, it kind of makes a strange kind of sense. This was wartime Britain. It was a really remote village back in the 40s. People did have superstitions about this sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Britain's even now is quite superstitious. Like,
yeah.
The whole black cat walking on the ladders, 3 grates.
Yeah.
It's even still, like, to some degree, there's remnants of it still in British culture. Like, would you say so, Josh?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. There's a lot of people, like, in Britain who still, even if they don't really believe it, they won't walk over 3 grates.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The black cat's walking, don't walk under a ladder because it's bad luck.
Yeah.
Smashing a mirror is bad luck.
Yeah.
Even if people don't believe it, they still, it's like permeated into British culture almost. It's like just a bit of tradition.
Yeah.
But if you're going back to the 40s
yeah.
in a rural village.
And it's just been ravaged by war. Like, people do extreme things under extreme circumstances. And, you know, I guess emotions generally are heightened. But specifically on superstitions, I mean, I'm Spanish. And even when we go back to Spain and you go to the pueblos and you, like, speak to people, I mean, Catholics, maybe it's a bit more amped up. But, man, they've got stories. You just speak to, like, my family, like, yeah, we saw a ghost. And then the devil. And then, like, you know, people are really into it. So let alone in the 40s, it's absolutely, contextually speaking, I absolutely believe that people were probably like, man, there was a bad harvest. A couple of heifers died. Like, something's going on here. The weird guy who could talk to animals, you know.
In an area that was known for it.
Yeah,
so we've got that too.
Exactly. It gets even wilder.
Yeah. Now, it turned out, as people dug it a little bit deeper, people started to believe, was history repeating itself? So what really stood out to investigators during this case was the eerie resemblance to another local murder nearly 70 years before this one happened. Back in 1875, a woman named Anne Tennant was killed in the village of Lower Quinton, just 10 miles lower from Lower Quinton. Anne had left her home to run some errands. On her way back, she crossed paths with a group of farm workers, including a man named James Haywood. Without a warning, he launched a brutal attack, stabbing her in the leg and the head with a pitchfork. A local farmer did step in, separated him, and was able to restrain him until the police arrived. But tragically, it was far too late, and Anne passed away from her injuries. The attacker believed that Anne was a witch. According to him, she had cursed his pigs, and when the animal died, that was all the proof he needed. When questioned, Haywood told the police that he believed that Anne was a witch, and even claimed that there were others, and that he planned to kill them. He was later found guilty by reason of insanity, and he spent the rest of his days locked up in an asylum. Over the years, rumours spread that Anne had been pinned to the ground with a pitchfork and slashed with a billhook, a similar tool to the slash hook found in the Charles Walton case. However, some of these details were never confirmed. Could have been some people just wanted to tie things together and, you know, create a sense of eeriness. But if it is true, it's terrifying. But Anne was killed and she was pinned down with a pitchfork.
Yep.
So, yeah, but even crazier, there's evidence to suggest that Charles may have actually been related to Anne, possibly her great-grandson. And again, though this exact connection hasn't been fully fleshed out, but there are some people who believe that, going back in the family tree, that this is a real possibility, that they were related.
Wild.
Really wild.
Which might add to why they suspected him of being a witch.
Great
because
point,
they're like, you know what, it's in the bloodline.
Exactly.
It just adds to it.
And if people knew of the local witch woman who was murdered with a pitchfork, they might have said, when you do the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
That old ritual of pin them down.
For
staking,
sure.
is it called? Staking.
Yeah, staking, yeah.
Terrifying.
Horrible.
In Charles's case, the parallels were hard to ignore. He too was killed with a pitchfork, pinned to the ground, and strangely enough, his employer had lost a heifer just days before the murder. The police couldn't say for certain whether the similarities were pure coincidence or something more sinister, but the nature of the case and Charles's family line would compound when investigators stumbled upon something truly eerie. Now, let's just rewind for a second. When Detective Fabian of Scotland Yard arrived at the crime scene, he concluded that the killings were clearly a ghastly climax of a pagan ritual. This was further confirmed when he was handed a curious piece of local law. A local policeman gave him a book written back in 1929 by a local village priest. It was a strange story that caught Fabian's attention. According to the book, a ploughboy named Charles Walton had a chilling experience back in 1885. For 8 nights in a row, the boy claimed to have seen a black phantom dog while walking home from the farm where he worked. On the 9th night, the dog appeared again, but this time it silently walked beside him before transforming into a headless woman dressed in a black silk gown and a hooded cape. Terrified, young Walton ran home, only to find out that his sister had just died from a sudden and unexplained illness. Naturally, the detective wondered, could this boy be the same Charles Walton who had just been murdered 60 years later? Strangely enough, the timelines matched up. Walton would have been around 14 or 15 in 1885. However, there was a problem with the theory. Charles Walton, the one who was murdered, didn't have a sister who died on that year. What is strange, however, is the black dog motif began to appear during the early days of the investigation. One police car reportedly struck and killed a black dog, and another was found hanging from a tree on Meon Hill, not far from the murder scene, and where apparently the devil lives. Fabian himself later claimed to have seen a black dog while searching the area for clues. Moments afterward, he encountered a young boy nearby, seemingly looking for something. When the detective asked what he was searching for, and asked, "Are you looking for a dog?" the young boy turned pale and ran off without saying a word.
Wow.
That gave me that freaked when I was reading this case. I was that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, strange.
It's so strange. And
it's
like,
so
what?
weird.
The exact same name, Charles Walton. Mate, his great grandmother possibly staked. And then he has like all these, possibly Charles, as a young boy, has all these super eerie experiences with like a headless woman in a black silk gown, the whole thing. And then it's just wild.
So crazy.
So weird.
And then a very credible policeman from London has come from the city where superstition will be less.
Yeah, for sure.
He comes along. It's almost like the Wicker Man vibes.
Yeah.
You seen the movie Wicker Man?
Wicker Man is based off this. It
No
came
way.
from this this case was so famous over the
my
decades that it
God.
generated a whole era of films, and Wicker Man's one of them. It's the idea.
This is Wicker Man vibes because the policeman goes to an island, sees the superstition,
Exactly.
gets caught up in it.
Yeah.
Just imagine like stumbling upon this and reading it. This is like,
Yeah.
well, it is movie material. This is something straight out of a movie.
It triggered it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, because it's the whole idea of like an outsider coming into a little quiet town and everything looks Christian and normal, and like it's like Cotswolds is like a beautiful area. If you don't know, it's just
like a fairy tale
It's
land.
a fairy tale. The little cottage, you know,
Josh
so
will pop
cute.
a photo up here. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's like magical. In The Holiday, Kate Winslet, she lives in Cotswold. It's like the most quintessential cute place on planet Earth. And yet,
you scratch the surface.
Yeah, and then you come out, and then an outsider comes in, and he opens, and what's hiding behind people's doors in their private home, like the devil and witchcraft, and it's like the stuff of movies.
This is the part which made me really think this case was.
And all the black
wild.
dogs, which I mean, I
The
didn't know was
black
a thing, but then the fact that they believed it was a thing, and then the hanging dog.
What's the relevance of the? What's the relevance of a black dog? Hey Josh, can you Google that for us real quick?
I think it's just a sign of the devil, right?
I
A black
don't
dog.
know.
It's like a black. It's like a super. It's just super. It's just meant to be a sign of evil.
I mean, I've heard of a black cat.
Yeah,
heard the black
I
cat's
think
been
the
a
black
thing.
dog. Oh, isn't it a messenger for death?
Ooh, okay.
I think it is meant to be the messenger of death or something like that. Like if you see a black dog outside of a front of a house, you freak out because
Right,
it's a
okay.
sign that someone's about to die in that house.
I had a black dog.
Yeah, poor dog. I mean, that's why
Yeah.
that's why black dogs and black cats are adopted less, because
No
people still have
way.
suspicions. So
That's
the
so
the least popular cats are black ones. If it's a black cat, you're doomed.
So black dogs are associated with death
Yes.
and the devil. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. And this police officer has seen them everywhere.
Yeah.
As he's researching and
Yeah.
investigating this
Yeah.
weird small village murder
And it gets hung where his body in
Yeah.
the days after.
where the devil lives.
Yeah. Wild.
Creepy. Now, if that wasn't weird enough, it gets even stranger. At some point during the investigation of the murder of Charles, a letter was handed in to Scotland Yard. It was allegedly written by a woman identifying herself only as Mrs. Jones. They claimed that a witch's coven was active in or around Lower Quinton. Charles Walton had come into conflict with this coven either by refusing to join, threatening to expose them, or violating their code of secrecy. They also said that the ritualistic nature of his death was described as a form of punishment or sacrifice within occult tradition. This letter has never been released, and its authenticity has never been verified. Some believe it was a hoax, and some believe it was just someone trying to sensationalize the case by mixing it in with some local folklore. Others think that Mrs. Jones might have been a frightened local trying to alert authorities to something no one else would dare speak of.
But remember how we said that in 1949, so 4 years after Walton was discovered, how there was a sighting at those stones, the rollright stones, so those ancient stone circle, and there was like those two women had spotted a bunch of women, one with the goat's mask, and they're all dancing and chanting. What if that was like, okay,
Good dancing that.
And initially when I saw this, I heard about it, I'm like, okay, this is obviously ridiculous. Someone's just adding, fuel to the fire. This is obviously not real. Like, it's a hoax. But then I remembered that sighting was apparently a real sighting. So if that's a real sighting, then there must be a coven.
Sounds like a frightened local as well.
Yeah.
It does sound like someone's concerned.
Yeah.
She's living around these people who are engaged in these terrifying practices.
Yeah. She didn't go to the media either. She gave it to the police.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is a good sign in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%.
If you give it to the media, that's almost like you want attention.
For sure.
Exactly.
For sure. So over the decades, the case has remained cold and a total mystery. In 1952, a psychic society held a secret seance on Meon Hill on the anniversary of Charles's death. While the identity of the murderer was not revealed, Walton is rumoured to have left the following message: I forgive, I deserve what was coming to me, but not in such a brutal way.
Never happened, did it? That never happened, did it? That did not happen.
Maybe. Then there was the mystery of Charles Walton's missing pocket watch. Police feared it might have just dropped as his body was moved, or the killer took it. They even brought in Royal Engineers with mine detectors to scan the area, but nothing turned up. A photo of the watch was circulated nationally, but it remained missing for 15 years until August 1960. Builders renovating Walton's old cottage found a pocket watch tucked away. It was passed to the Warwickshire... Oh, did I say right?
Warwickshire
CID, who examined it carefully. They even checked the repairer's marks to try and confirm if it had belonged to Walton. Unfortunately, the man who had originally sold Walton the watch had since died, so no definitive link could be made. However, that's crazy. It sounds to me that was a watch. They just couldn't 100% say it was his.
Yeah.
But why? What was it doing in his own home?
Begs the question, was his niece involved? That's what
That's
some
what
people have started to think.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Was his niece involved? Killers also keep trophies.
That's true.
And if...
And that sounds like a trophy because he didn't take it off to just sell it. He ripped it off after a really aggressive murder.
Or she. Maybe it was the niece.
I don't think she would have been strong enough to kill him. Obviously, this is speculation.
Yeah, this is pure speculation.
Yeah. I think it would have had to have been a man who was strong enough to be able to carry out that sort of an attack. But in terms of the motivation, it was a super angry, personal, almost vindictive. So it makes me wonder if that trophy, if the watch was in fact his and it was at the house and Edith was involved, it kind of cast for me like a kind of a sinister viewpoint, because initially I was like, oh, what a wonderful man who adopted his 3-year-old niece, right? But what if there was something I know this is, we're going out on a limb here, but what if it was like a predatory relationship?
Well, some people online have gone down that route, so we should touch on it.
Yeah.
Some people think like maybe he adopted it for some predatory reasons.
Yeah, Woody Allen.
Yeah, that kind of vibe,
of vibe.
And that maybe as what's the word? Revenge.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe she might have had a lover in the village, or something she might have told, or someone she might have told.
Or she just snapped.
Or she snapped, and together they might have killed him.
Exactly. And she was really the behind it, and the other person just carried it out.
Exactly. That's what some people think. Who knows?
Yeah.
That's one little theory that people have come up with.
But even if it's not, what was it doing in the house?
Exactly.
That's so odd.
It's so strange. So that makes you wonder, could it have been the niece?
Yeah.
That's the one reason why some people think it was anyway.
Yeah.
Could just been a thing. It could have been another pocket watch that he misplaced or lost, something like that.
Yeah.
That could be it too.
Yeah. Regardless, that was really the last big update from the case, was the discovery of the watch, and it's since just been a cold case. But an eerie element of the case that is still pervasive today is the way in which the inhabitants react to media inquiries into the case. So you can still visit Lower Quinton. In fact, the gravestone of both Charles and the employer Potter have since been moved because too many people kept coming every single February the 14th on Valentine's Day to visit this town. And they're like, there's too many tourists in here. Too many people come to this grave.
No way.
So they had to move it. But you can still visit the town. And visiting Lower Quinton today, you can quickly get the sense that Charles Walton's murder is still a sensitive subject, maybe even more so than you'd expect. People are polite, but there's a clear boundary. One local put it bluntly, it is a very touchy subject and we can't talk about it. We daren't. Daren't? We daren't.
We daren't.
We daren't. That must be English. We daren't. The Daily Mail once reported that the murder was very gruesome and that rumour has it that it centred on the occult and witchcraft. Some locals apparently believe that people known to the victims and his killer had been sworn to secrecy. One resident who didn't want to be named told reporters the reason behind the murder and the name of his killer are known locally, but will never be divulged. She finished by saying, it is our village's best kept secret. What a thing. That's a direct quote.
It's a crazy thing to say.
Yeah. A reporter from the Daily Mail who recently went to the town said the most striking thing was how prepared people seemed to be when asked about it. No one seemed surprised I was there to ask questions. In fact, it felt like they had all agreed long ago on how to respond when outsiders started asking questions. At the College Arms pub, the landlord summed up the village's position as, I can't talk to you about that. After 17 years of running this place, I know that there are some things we don't talk about. Talking about it would upset people, and there's no sense in alienating anyone in a small village like this. He then said something else. In cases like this, there's always someone who knows something. Someone knows what happened, but for the sake of relatives and for not upsetting people, no one will say. Even the smallest hint of witchcraft seems to be deliberately avoided. One former landlord of that pub had considered decorating the lounge in like broomstick riding witches and kind of like playing into the stereotype of the town just for a bit of fun, but quickly changed his plans after there was basically a bit of an uproar from the villagers. It's a very sensitive subject. While sitting in the pub, one local leaned in and said quietly, you've got to keep your mouth shut around here. He believed the murder was a ritual killing and that Walton was definitely practicing witchcraft. Then, finally, last tidbit, a local named Jim who offered a different perspective. He said the murder took place in a small, idyllic and picturesque village in the Cotswolds. It's an incredibly niche case, but in the broader context, it wasn't all that unusual. There were pagan rituals happening all over the place. And with that, the conversation ended. Just like everyone else in Lower Quinton, Jim had said enough and no more.
What a case.
I know.
What a case. Also, we need to go there.
I know.
ASAP.
We need to go to that pub.
I'm talking to, what's he called? Tony Smith.
I know.
Yeah, tell me what you know. It's wild.
Wild.
80 years later and people are still freaked out to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know something must have gone on then.
Yeah.
Because, like we said, in you hear these details from the Daily Mail, but when you live somewhere, you hear these small little rumours. Some rumours have been circulating amongst
100%.
these villages and they're not letting anything out.
Exactly.
Best kept secret, apparently.
Yeah, that's a wild thing to say. It's our town's best kept secret.
What a strange thing to say.
I know, but the fact that they're all like in agreement about what we say to the outside and what we don't.
Like it's scripted.
Yeah.
Oh, we need to go. We need to go and vlog it.
I know.
Our plan, we haven't reviewed. Well, I guess we have a plan to do like behind the scenes content. Like this case takes place after dark, and we're gonna go to like these places that we might, if we cover something, then go.
Yeah.
For this, for example, we're gonna go to the Highway of Death in Australia.
Yes.
We're gonna go here.
Luna Park.
Yeah. We're gonna go to these places and just ask some people. We could try asking some people.
Yeah.
Stay in a hotel there and that kind of thing, and like.
Hopefully that pub has rooms. You could
Yeah,
just like
that'd be so
visit
cool.
Meon Hill.
Yeah.
The Stone Circle.
Absolutely.
I'm just like, but what a crazy I mean, England, Europe, it's just incredible. Like, what wild history. And they're just like, what? Just multiple witch-killing murders that so happen to be on the day of a pagan, pagan, like important pagan date, and in an area that has all this occult and like history. Madness.
Yeah.
So like I said, when I first came across this, I'm like, okay, obviously he was just probably killed for money, like the most obvious reason. And like people are just like being superstitious after the fact. But after going through this entire case, I'm like, no.
Yeah, the more you delve in, the more it becomes like, oh, this was definitely a witch. This seems like a witch killing.
Obviously, I don't necessarily think he was a witch. If he was probably just like a harmless pagan, cunning man, cunning folk that was probably pretty harmless. But regardless, Potter used that superstition, I think, to take him out because his heifer died the day before.
Yeah.
The previous year, there was a terrible harvest. So he was probably like, nah, that guy is responsible. You want someone to blame.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
guy, and you get really, to take someone's life, there has to be a justification more than just like, he did me wrong. It's like that, like a supernatural, godly justification for taking someone's life makes sense.
For the greater good.
For the greater good, yeah.
I hate saying I enjoy cases because it sounds a bit weird when you talk about murder.
With true crime.
But like with this, enjoy is the wrong word.
Yes.
But I really enjoyed learning about this case.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. I thought it was one of the most fascinating cases I've come across.
Me too.
So that's the case of Charles Walton.
Yes.
Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe, please. Yes. I'd be very happy if you did.
Yes. And please leave down below what cases you'd like us to see next.
And let us know what you think as well, because I'd love to hear people's theories. Maybe there's something that we didn't think of, or someone's going to hear this and come up with their own little theory.
Yes, please.
But so far we have the niece possibly doing it, a witch killing. What else is there? Just
Potter. It's Potter.
It's Potter or a random murder. Maybe it was an opportunistic killer or something. Who knows? But that's the theory.
Thief.
A thief.
Was, with the pocket book.
Yeah, but we'll see. Let us know what you think. But thank you for watching and take care.
Bye.
Bye. That's youth language for ass. For ass. Yeah. Maybe we should colour code. Maybe Josh was right all along. He's gonna fucking see you smile now. Is he smiling?
Well, you get everything I say, don't you?
Fuck off, you twat.